have a seat anywhere you want. So Charity, we now have a quorum if you want to go ahead and start. I think I'm good.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And if we could have a roll call, please.
I can do that. Greg Giroux. Here. Chris St. Germain.
Here.
Christine Earps. Angela Pomponio. Charity Robinson.
Here. And if we could stand for the flag salute.
On the screen, it's a little faded, but it's there.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag,
to the flag
United
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thought we were doing a round there for a second.
Definitely a little delay there. If we could have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move that we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So Dr. Garrett, I'll have you launch into discussion and I'll just listen and hopefully be there shortly.
Okay, sounds good. So everybody that's here, I'll speak up for everyone, and I think you guys can hear outside of there too. So while we're here today, our main priority is to talk about our metrics and our narrative for our continuous improvement plan. And I've already discussed with some of our leadership team on that, and our board will be included this as well. So annually, we have to do a continuous improvement plan. We have to set some of our goals, some of our metrics for our students, for their academic achievement. And there's some other areas of it as well. So we're going to go through that. A piece of this is, and I'm kind of going backwards on our agenda, but we'll get to each one of these pieces. We also generally set a calendar of some of the dates that we will be discussing data and discussing typical things during a year throughout the months. We have a sample from a couple of years ago. Last year was kind of a messed up year. The year before that, we ended kind of crazy as well. So we haven't really addressed that. We need to go back and kind of reform and revamp, and I need the input from the leadership to really get those dates down, like our testing dates. I know, for example, like MAPS, when we do our 3 tests, right, we do a beginning, an interim, and an end. So we have sufficient time to have that data gathered, then we can discuss that at the board meeting, whatever the next board meeting comes up. So we need to make sure we have all that aligned. And then the last thing, since all of our board members are not here, we're not going to do much with this. And Charity, I wouldn't mind probably striking this off at this point. We were going to do a little bit on this book study, but we'll do just a short discussion on what we started this last year and maybe bring everybody up to speed. But we're not going to go very in depth in that. We'll do that the next round as we go. So this keeps getting pushed back, but it's just falling through the cracks like a lot of things do. So also, I wanted to introduce Derek Larson, who is our new transportation director, to everybody. So board members who have not met, we'll get the official approval at the next board meeting, but he was already an employee and we went through the process and he's already taken the reins. So welcome aboard, and trial by fire, right? Yeah. Yep. That's what we all do. So I want to keep this as, concise and productive as possible. So one thing real quick, and we will do a little bit on, we'll just start with these, if that's okay. Dr. Robinson, to start on this book discussion and kind of where it led to. So if somebody else, you guys got to be interactive. I'm not talking the whole time. So talk to us a little bit about what we did last spring with this book study and where we were at with this, and kind of give a little general overview if you don't mind. So I don't have to. Anybody?
So we did a book review.
Use the microphone. Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Garrett had us do a book review or a book study, and we didn't complete the entire book, but the book's called The Advantage, and basically it talks about how to form strong teams and what successful businesses as well as educational organizations do to form strong teams that basically work as a cohesive unit. It talks about communication skills. Jason has it open, so he can probably talk a little bit about the chapters. I mean, his is all dog-eared. He's been reading it every night.
Yeah.
But,
It's taking him a while, but he's getting
yeah.
there.
But really what it did is it kind of goes into organizational health and how to create a healthy organization through not just leadership, but build healthy teams and what those communication strategies look like with those teams. And it gives some narratives on specific situations that we then talked about how we can relate to some of those narratives in our own settings, and then also amongst our leadership team to be able to move towards common goals and find the best outcomes. I've taken some of it back to my staff, bits and pieces as we looked at things like crucial conversations, crucial confrontations, and just fundamental strategies on how to build strong teams. And hopefully that trickles down to our students as we look at how they communicate with each other and as well as the teachers.
Nice.
Very good.
Anybody else got anything else to add? A little bit more in depth than that, but that's okay. Oh, Jason does.
So today, discipline 2 is creating clarity. So today's, most of our work is about looking at our data and creating clarity. Where are we going? We are already doing things about building our leadership team, but so today it's like, okay, what are our goals? Where are we going? And so focused on clarity.
So really the gist of that, there's lots of pieces to it, but really it is, maintaining focus and, creating goals that are clear and then repeating that and repeating that and repeating that until everybody knows what our goals are and where we're headed. And I think that's important. We get lost in the shuffle with a lot of things that are going on, and we just need to have some goals that are set. So with that kind of segues into, our calendar, which I think we probably need to do our calendar after we look at some of these metrics, because there's going to be some conversations come up about that, about when some of these things happen. I think it'll be easier to fill in. So this whole, back to the book study piece of it, the reason I did that is last year, as fractured as we were, I'll wait for Mindy's. Sure you did. That's what they all say. So last year, as we know, it was pretty fractured year, just survival, trying to get through the year with a lot of unknowns. So at the end of the year, we tried to bring everybody back together and refocus on this year and try to make it about education. There's other issues we deal with over and over again, but really what we need to be focused on is how can we improve students and, where are we headed and what are we doing? So that kind of leads us into our continuous improvement plan. And again, I know we're kind of skipping around on that, but that item 3. So our continuous improvement plan, and you guys have probably seen this. There's a link on our webpage for last year's, and there's a link to this one we're going to put on. This is something we're required to do by the state. Every school district does a continuous improvement plan annually. Those change throughout time as far as there's some standard things on here that every district has to report. And then there's some things that we as a district will come up with and hold ourselves accountable to as well. This year it's changed a little bit since I've been here. This is year 5. This has changed twice now in the last 5 years. Used to be a lot more lengthy. There's a narrative that goes along with it. We use a lot of the same narratives. It's kind of what we're doing and how we're making these things happen. But they've changed. Really what they've added in here this year were 2 really big components that we're going to work on. And one is not only just putting a percentage of looking at the percentage of students, setting a goal, saying what percentage of students, and I'm going to use 8th grade math for an example, to meet proficient or advanced. Now we're looking at, in addition to that, we're also saying what is the percentage of students we want to show that make adequate growth. So some of the discussion we have today is about adequate growth and what does that look like? What actually is adequate growth? It's defined differently no matter where you're at, and every organization can define that separately. So It's one of those areas that we need to, it's new, we need to define it. If you look at the state adequate growth, their definition basically says improvement by any student in any area that you're measuring. So when we look at that, it gets pretty deep and pretty complicated. There's scale scores, there's levels of reporting, there's lots of different pieces in there. And, if we're looking at a scale score, we were just looking at that today. And if a student improves one scale score, may not necessarily mean they improved a level, because there could be, 50 scale scores in every single level. And we looked at that, and we're getting ready, we're dissecting that a little bit more and trying to come up with some really basic pieces on that. So that's a big part of it. The other piece that is new is reporting, and I have it here, is reporting our, let me pull it up.
So real quick on that one.
Yep.
When I think about defining what is adequate growth, you
Mhm.
have a goal in mind. Wouldn't you start at that goal and work your way backwards? To identify the metrics around what is adequate growth to get to that goal?
Yes, but it's more complicated than that, because there's more variables in that. But yes, you would set a goal, and what we want to do is look at a little bit of the history, so we're not making an unreasonable goal. For example, if we look at our students in eighth grade, last year our goal for eighth grade math for proficiency and advanced was to hit 48%. The reality is, the kids that did growth was probably more like 75%. So just because they're not meeting proficient or advanced doesn't mean they're not growing. So you have to look at all the levels of students and make sure we're seeing some growth in that, not just measuring the proficient and advanced. But the state does judge us on that.
The end goal is graduation, right? So there's certain proficiencies around graduation. And then are there targets along the way?
There are, but what the state would, and what we have to do with the SIP plan is they have some defined for us, some of those targets. So in particular, we're looking at eighth grade math, eighth grade ELA, sixth grade math, sixth grade ELA, and fourth grade ELA. Those are target areas that we have to report every single year that will change. And those were really where the input comes from, and there's more variables that are in here. There's graduation rates. There's all these other things that are in there. Yes, there's pieces of that.
So those performance pieces come from the state. Those are dictated to us.
Yes,
So they think-
they're on this. Yes. Yep. And then we have room to set our own goals as well, in whatever area. So last year, for example, our goal was to increase the number, and I can't remember exactly what the percentage was, of students participating in CTE courses. And we met that goal. I can't remember exactly what it was. I'll have to pull that out. So that we can kind of come up with our own as well. And that makes it very unique to us. So the new piece to this, like I said, was whenever we look at growth, we have to define what growth is. The state does not define that for us. They define it differently than what every single district will define that. So we have to be very particular to us. What do we see as growth? And I think to do that, we're gonna have to really dig into the data and see what our trends are, and then make a reasonable growth. So the other piece I was just getting ready to show you, it's up, it doesn't show very good up here, but basically we have to set our, you can turn that down, would be great. The staff performance is another piece of this. So the previous year results versus our current year performance targets. So what we have to decide, and this is really just kind of a generic form, and if you guys haven't seen this, it's the same thing all the way up and down through it. We have to determine how we're going to categorize how we report this. So something we have to be careful with when we're looking at student progress versus teacher performance is when you're talking about our smaller schools, there's really only one teacher per grade level. So you can't really say, the first grade teacher, because you're identifying that person, and we don't want to do that. But we can look at it across the district, and we need to decide if, and I was talking to Mr. Hunter about this just a little bit earlier, probably the best way, and the examples I've seen have basically said, like, science teachers, high school, 7 through 12 science teachers shall meet, will meet this type of performance, or they'll meet their goal, which is their students meeting the progress that they have written on their own goals. And you guys probably know a little bit more about how they write those goals. So if you want to go in a little bit more detail about that, how your teachers write their goals and what they set, that would be good to share with the board and each other. So whoever wants to go, you all do it.
I can start. So for my teachers, we have what's called an individual learning plan. And we take specific data that they acquire in any form of pre-assessment. So some content areas have different forms of assessment based on that specific content area. So what we're talking about right now, what Dr. Garrett just talked about, are things that get reported back to the state via the ISAT. So that's the data, and I have a file like of our ISAT data, and that's accessible to anybody. But if I'm a teacher who teaches something that's in a different content area, they have to establish a pre-assessment where they establish a baseline for where those students are at. Then they determine what standards those students are strong in, what standards those students are struggling in, and then in their individual learning plan, they have to establish what would be a good growth for that student based on that content area. So if the kid's going into calculus, let's say, they are typically not going to have seen calculus before or pre-calculus. So that pre-assessment, they may get 10 points out of 50 on that. And so the growth on that could be a 30-point growth or a percentage gain growth. And so each individual content area establishes those, has those in their ILP that are due in September, and then they're submitted, and we sit down, we talk about those, and then they have to submit evidence that they've given that assessment to those students, and those students have shown growth. And that's part of the sit-down evaluation process in those individual learning plan, ILP. And then, so if we get our evaluations audited, we have to show that the teacher has an individual learning plan to the State Department, because there's a box you have to check that shows that they have made growth on whatever measure they've chosen to show that growth on based on their pre-assessment when those students came in. So
is that like a mitigation plan if the student is not meeting the objective?
right, so you
I
have
understand.
So you have formative and summative assessment. So formative assessment is what the teachers do day to day, week to week. And then a summative assessment would be, let's say, the test at the end of the unit. If they see the students are struggling in a standard, then they go back and they spiral back and they remediate in that standard. The summative assessment, the major summative assessment, is the one that they're using on their state reported growth plan. So that percentage has to be reported back to the state. So if the teacher said that, their goal is for the students to make 20% growth from their pre to post assessment, we then have to report what percentage of students made the amount of growth that the teacher said. And that's in domain 5 and what we call the Danielson framework, which is what we use
I've
for.
heard that word.
Yeah, that's what we use for teacher evaluations, is the Danielson framework.
I was thinking of Pam, so it's not Pam.
Charlotte, no, it's Charlotte. Danielson.
Charlotte, not
Yeah.
Pam, Charlotte.
So there's a lot of information I just went over, and it takes a lot of time, and teachers, there's times where you have to revisit that. But what that does give us is that all teachers are doing a pre-assessment, so they know what students they have in their classroom and where those skill levels are at, so they can formulate their instruction around the student needs rather than just saying, here's the scripted curriculum.
So I'd like to make that so that I understand, because it seems like this is important for this discussion. Is that so the teacher's individual learning plan is sort of a mitigation plan that will be put into effect if students aren't meeting the desired test results for performance?
No, not at all.
No,
Okay,
No, it's their goals, their personal goals for the year. It could be associated with students, but it could be that they're working towards their certification. There are multiple things that the teacher could be working on. That individual learning plan is not necessarily tied to student achievement, unless possibly the year before there were some real deficits, and that was something that we negotiated would be part of it, but it's rare that ever happens.
it's both. So you have to have, the state requires you to have a pre and a post, the data that you're reporting back on the growth, that's required. You have to have that for every single teacher. Now, in domains 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the Danielson framework, which is what we evaluate them on, that's different. They set a goal in each one of those domains, specific, and without getting too deep into the Danielson framework, it's specific to what we call subdomains in that framework, which I'm more than happy to share that stuff out if you're ever interested in it. But but we have to report we have to report growth data to the state for every teacher.
So are domains similar to evaluation criteria?
Correct. And so it could be something like classroom environment would be a overarching domain, and in there, there's subdomains that speak to that classroom environment.
I give you some examples. So maybe a first grade teacher for their data piece might say, 90% of my students will meet their IRI measure of student growth. So on the Idaho reading assessment for first graders, maybe they're going to say 90% are going to be proficient. And then they may have another goal that says
So that is based on student.
yes, that's
Can't
one
be.
goal based on student achievement. And like Brian said, we have to report the percentage of students who met the target. Another goal might be, I'm going to work on my parent communication. So maybe they were rated basic on their evaluation, the year before. So I'm going to set a goal to, send out this many
Very well.
newsletters, whatever.
Thank you.
So now, a high school PE teacher, his or her goal might be, physical fitness testing, or, for the data piece of it, and some other piece out of the framework.
So there is a student accomplishment component, and then there are other behavioral and performance-based.
And what Mike's saying is on the continuous improvement plan, it sounds like we have to set goals that a certain percentage of our teachers or something like that
Yeah.
will meet their goals. And
Yeah,
we're
and
gonna
that's.
have to report.
I
Yeah.
got into.
So what I have up on the board is an example that the state sends, and it's kind of hard to read because of the lighting, but it goes through and they have examples broken down by grade level. So if we want to break it down by grade level, but this is not the do all end all, they said you can do it however you want to do it. So there again, if we want to look at subject matters, or if we want to look at grade levels, we want to look at whatever it might be, I'm game for whatever. We need to come to consensus and know what we're gauging and something that's doable. We don't want to set target, we want to set them high, but we don't want to set them unobtainable either. So I think that's a big piece of this. So there's several examples here. And like I said, these are all broken down pretty much like 9 through 12. There's a 9 through 12 Spanish, there's a 9 through 12 science, and they're hard to read. But basically that's based off of ISAT scores, or ISAT ELA, or US citizenship test for US government and history. So there's a whole range of things we can do. And that's a piece we need to come together. And I think for our first year, we want to keep it pretty general and cover a lot of bases so it's obtainable and doable, but yet make it something usable.
Can you
So-
go over the state required ones so we know what's
Yes.
the minimums?
Yeah, so yes. So this we have to do. This is a piece of it. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, so this is a piece of what we have to do. That we have to come up with something with our teacher metrics and performance targets. As you go back up through, I'll just start at the top here and we'll run through them here. So our first piece is what I was talking about earlier. We have to set our goals for our graduation rate, our 5-year cohort graduation rate, percentage of students who met college ready benchmark on the college and entrance exam. And then we have, like I said before, the ISAT, the 8th grade math ELA, 6th grade math ELA, spring grade 1, 2, 3, 4, or grade 1, 2, and 3 spring IRI, and then the 4th grade ELA, and then of course kindergarten as well. And then we have, these are our own we can come up with, measuring literacy. You can click on that on the metrics piece. On the metrics, yep. The tab that says the instructional examples is probably the best one to look at first. Yeah. It's the exact same as the metrics itself. It's just, it gives the examples. Yes, so this, you can see anything that is blank, any of those colors, they're required. All of them are required, I guess I would say. So the blue is the main ones that we focus on with student achievement. They're broken down, I guess, into different metrics, and I'm not sure how they color coded, but all of them we need to be reporting and setting goals for. And some of them are pretty simple, like, for example, percent of students whose learning plans are reviewed annually by grade level. We set a goal of 100% and we do 100%. Our counselors speak with every kid and we make plans every single year with every single person. So that's our goal, and that's what we do. So, I mean, that's a pretty easy one to keep that up there. And how that's done, that's up to the individual schools. I know they do that differently, but to review a plan, and basically that is saying, what's your course plan of study and how does that look? So that's a pretty simple one. Number of students who go on to post-secondary, 1 year high school, 2 year high school, and you can see in here the ones that say not required. And then these are college and career advanced, and these goals we can come up with as well. These have like high school seniors who complete the FAFSA, just some pretty simple ones that are just keeping us on track, kind of covering all of it. No, these are samples. Yep. So this year it looks a little different than last year. So there's some additional things in here that we don't have any really history on. So that's where the difference. So that's why the samples. And then we get down to the teacher targets as well. So, I think it's best if we jump into the beginning of this and just start going through each one of these and just kind of knock it out as we go. And I can tell you some of the historical data as we go as well. I pulled that out. So let's just start in with our 4-year cohort graduation rate. And I have that, our historical data, 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20, we did not get reported. And then 2021. So you can see where we're at with those. Our 2021 goal was 90%. And our 2021 reality was 81.3, which reported on our state report card. Again, that comes back to the whole IDYCA has not been taken out of that. So our goal needs to be realistic either way.
IDYCA should not be reported in that.
But it is. They do it every time.
Okay, I'll deal with
Yeah. So that's why it's at 81.3%
it. We have
last year.
We have a letter from the state saying that they will not
Yep.
incorporate that.
Yep.
in the State report card for the district report card, so I'll fix that.
So reality is that's going to be higher. So we don't have the true number on that until we get that pulled out. Last year we were shooting for 90%. And we typically we will get close to that. I think that's a reasonable goal. So you guys that are in the high schools are probably the ones that need to have that discussion. If there's something we need to be adding or subtracting, and the board members do include.
In my mind, when we think about establishing goals, we need to look back to our vision and
Mhm.
tie that to our vision, which follows the path of the advancements, right? So we said in our vision, there's 3 key components. There's innovative, initiative, which I'm not sure how that ties in, and then learning based. So does that make sense to loop back to those within our vision and say we're going to be innovative, we're going to be excellence in learning, and we're going to have initiative? I mean, are we asking that question of each of the goals that we're setting?
And I think, yes, I think reasonably so. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, I think we ask those every day with all of our data. So when we look at graduation rate, a 4-year cohort graduation rate, 90% is pretty high for a rural district. And but it's reasonable, but it's pushing it. If we said, obviously we'd like 100% of our kids to graduate, but the reality is that's not the case. So we got to have obtainable goals. So 90% is where we've been. We have difficulty reaching that a lot of times, and there's a lot of factors that go into that.
So on this form and the metrics, it shows 17, 18 at 78%, 18, 19 at 84%. Those are actuals or are those goals?
Those are actuals.
So what are the actuals in 1920 and 2020?
So 1920, we did not have that. It wasn't reported back on our report card because we were out early, so they didn't report that the same. 2021 was 81.3.
81.3. So if we strive for 85%, then we're going to be.
That's what we're here for. We're having those discussions. I think this is one that is very convoluted because there's way more factors than we can control in the graduation rate. Kids
Is
moving
this-
in, kids
do I
moving out.
understand this 81.3 is not accurate because we included
Right.
IDYCA?
Yep.
So it's actually lower than that?
No, it'd be higher than that.
Be higher than
Yep.
that? Oh, I see.
IDYCA's four-year graduation rate is abysmal. They're the most at-risk students in the state, and they come from all over the state.
Right.
It's not a legitimate thing that that's included in our
Mhm.
report card. And I've had multiple meetings with the State Department, and I have a letter that states they will no longer do that,
That's why we
but
need to
they
get
are
it down.
continuing to do
Yep.
it.
They
So I'll
continue.
fix it.
Yep.
85 is probably reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We'd like
85
90.
is probably reasonable. The way they're calculated, you know, we often end up getting penalized for things that we really don't, they really aren't dropouts. Maybe they're going on a mission, or maybe they went into the military. Maybe they came late and they finished a semester later, you know, so 85 is reasonable. They have not been able to really calculate dropout rate very well.
Do we feel that 85 is a reasonable goal? Or are we
It doesn't
undercutting
s-
ourselves?
It doesn't sound reasonable when you think about kids, but we're really not saying 15% of our kids can graduate. That's really not what happens. You know. According to our past data, I think 85 is reasonable.
So one thing to keep in mind about the SIP plan is it is a 30,000-foot view. This is not specific in the, classroom. The most specific it gets is the grade level in some of these that we're getting ready to go through. But everything else is a big general. It doesn't take into account all the factors, just like what Jason was saying. You can't account for those things. If somebody is homeschooled, they pull them out in homeschool. Do we count them for graduation rate? They fall off of our radar, even though they may have accomplished that. And then maybe they came back, who knows? There's so many variables that we can't control. So
So is this a consensus thing or a motion or how do you?
well, I think it's just, where we're all at. And really the people who have in certain areas are going to have more of a say than others. I mean, I think our high school principals probably understand that as much as anybody.
Yeah, I
You know.
think 85% is reasonable. I
Yeah.
think just like what
Yep.
Mr. Hunter talked about, it's not that 15% of our kids can't graduate or won't, but what happens often too is if a student enrolls in your school, and let's say they're coming from an environment where they were deficient on credit, so if they're new, so we have to talk about mobility. And so these are kids that we never have had any contact with in JSD 171. They'll enroll in your school. Well, that student then reports out on your graduation rate, even though you maybe only saw that student for 2 weeks in your school. And so I think realistically, 85%
Yeah.
is fair.
And with the mobility rate that we have in our schools, we do pretty well overall.
But I can tell you the kids that are here for 4 years, we're looking at high 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha. Good.
Even 2 years, I'd say. Maybe.
So without it, IDYC in here, we might actually be at that level. So
I don't think we'll quite be there.
hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. We'd have to get
Just
that.
wonder if we should go ahead. You said kids that go all the way through, they're
Mhm.
90% graduation.
Well, I was gonna say, this actually says four-year cohort graduation rate
Yeah.
rather than
Mhm.
overall
That's true.
graduation rate. So we are looking at
Yeah.
those group of kids who are here for all 4 years, not the mobility students that are coming and going. So I think 95% for the cohort is actually a good target goal, but I think what we're reporting is an
Mhm.
overall graduation rate that the
Yeah.
state is giving us and not
So
the
that's
four-year
not
cohort rate.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Not right
So we're aiming for something higher for the students we have interaction with for the whole 4 years.
Right.
But what we're getting reported back is everybody.
Correct.
Yeah, the state average, I think if I remember correct, when things were reported on 4-year cohorts before COVID and spring shutdown, I think for most schools was right around 87 to 88 for the 4-year cohort. I think, so at 95 might still be a little bit high on that, but I think it all depends on what gets reported out. Like we said,
It
there's
does.
variables in there, so I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Mhm.
You know, I think for us, just speaking for our school, I think, you know, a 92 would be a very good goal based on what state average typically is historically on a 4-year cohort. Because the 4-year cohort on the state average, I could be wrong, but I want to say it's typically been around 86 to 88. Is that, you know, on that one on the 4-year? For some reason that sticks out to me, but I'd have to go back and do some research on
Right.
the state average on that.
We split that goal into two, the 4-year cohort and none.
It's hard to track is the problem. The data that we submit, it's, yeah,
And
because,
maybe we shouldn't have it say 4-year cohort, but just graduation.
well, it's what they're looking at as a 4-year cohort graduation rate. And for us to report it, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I feel like the data that they give us is never filtered the way it should be. I don't know why. We do it 3 times all the way around. In fact, we're regenerating reports on all of this stuff that they have. They already have the information. So I,
85% and move on to the next one, right?
This is the students, this is how it's calculated. Students who are entering grade 9 for the first time form a cohort that is subsequently adjusted by adding any students who transfer into the school.
that's what I thought.
During the next 4 years and subtracting any students who transfer out. Problem is on the transferring out, the only way they get transferred out in our system is if another school.
If they enter
enrolls
in
them
somewhere else.
and reports them. And so a lot of times we get students who kind of disappear, they move out of state, and then we have to submit all these appeals, and usually they deny them. You can even send an enrollment
I
from
thought there
another
was a piece of
school.
that.
So it's
Yeah.
really messy, and I don't know why to me, it doesn't make sense, but that's how they're calculated.
So with that explanation, I would suggest that we realize that it's a 4-year cohort, quote unquote, but it's not the
Mhm.
kids that are here for 4 years,
Right.
and we reduce that to an 85% goal.
Where'd you find that?
It's reasonable.
There are school districts that
Email it to you.
issue a new unique identifier when they come in, so essentially their cohort starts over. There's all kinds of crazy games that are played with this. And schools are sending them to alternative schools to get around it. The state really needs to do some work. Every child is supposedly issued a unique identifying number when they begin school, and it's supposed to travel with them. It is ridiculous for a school to have to track down where a kid with a unique identifier has gone to school elsewhere. If that identifier is being used, they have the information. We shouldn't have to track it down for them. But we are asked to call all these schools that the kid said they were going to verify if they're there or not. And we, at IDYCA, we found districts that would try a kid out for a couple of weeks. And if they weren't making it, they'd never enroll them, or act as if they never enrolled them. So
Oh,
it-
wow.
it's.
And there's
it's a
also-
really difficult
it
number
is.
to get a handle on. So 85% is something that we should be able to live with.
All right, we're gonna cruise on or we won't ever get through all these. So
good.
next one is not required, so we're not doing that. The percentage of students meet college and career ready benchmarks. And that's an optional metric as well. So I would recommend we stay away from that one right now so we can get some of this other, we can always come back. So the next one is percent of students who are proficient on the 8th grade math ISAT. So our goal last year was 48%. The actuals of the 8th grade proficiencies, 17-18 was 25%, 18-19 is 28%, 19-20 no tests. Last year was 31%. So our goal was pretty lofty at 48%, coming in, around 30. If you look overall, 29, 30 in that area. We saw some growth, which is great. Those are tough ones to handle whenever the kids weren't there the year before. So I'd say we did some really good things in math last year, even though it was an odd year.
I think it's important to note the state average is 38%.
Yep.
On that goal.
Yep.
On the 8th grade math, and then we have seen growth over the past 3 years. I think, I know for us, setting a more realistic goal to meet state average at 38%, 48% is a pretty lofty goal.
It is. Yes, it does.
Anytime we can meet or exceed the state average, that's a pretty solid. solid indicator of being successful.
It helps some, yeah. So this is where we kind of get into some of these metrics, and Dwayne and I have been going through some data. What you have to remember is when you're looking at ISAT scores, there's different pieces of it. So when you look at the level of students are level 1, 2, 3, and 4, below basic, basic, proficient, advanced, is that correct? Yeah. And then you look at a scale score for each one of those grade levels. So we're pulling apart, and we don't have all of it done yet, but we're pulling apart all those scale scores to see if there was growth or not. And that comes to the next one. So one of the new metrics, we have two pieces to the eighth grade math ISAT. One is students proficient or advanced, which is what we were looking at, the percentage, and the other is percentage of students who show adequate growth. So the definition of adequate growth is what we really need to come up with. Adequate growth can look different for every single person, and I was going through that a little bit earlier. When you look at scale score, and I'll just use this math, and I want to do a couple of disclaimers here. What we did is we compared 7th grade math ISAT scores to 8th grade math scores, and look at the scale scores. The scale scores actually have a small amount of range that are difference between the levels. So there may be a 5-point discrepancy between basic and proficient in one, compared to the other. So you have the range of what is it called? The percentage that shows each percentage. So it's almost like a weighted bell curve. So you have a few in the high end, a few in the low end, most are in the middle, but there's some discrepancies from point A to point B. So the scale score changes as you change grades. So you can't do a straight comparison of 7th grade. If they were to 2452 and they were to 2453 in 8th grade, did they have growth? And the answer to that is depends on where they were at. It can be a bigger range than that. So when we did it initially, we went through and assumed those scales were the same. So we would have some kind of number to look at and percentages to look at. And the way it turns out, we're pretty close to that. But once we get to the details, it could be a little bit different. So here's an example of what we went through on 8th grade ISAT, comparing over the years. So we went back to 2016, 17, 18, and 19 and showed the comparison of growth from 7th grade to 8th grade and how many students did that. So what we came up with, and this is a scale score, and again, this is skewed a little bit, but it's pretty close. 58.2% of our kids on average increased their scores, their scale score. So almost 60% of our kids increased scale score from 7th grade to 8th grade. But the other side of that, about 40% of our students decreased in scale score. So that's probably a number we need to be looking at more than who all advanced. So whenever you get the report from the state, you're going to see like level 1, 2, 3, or 4. We show that we had so many kids at level 1, which is below basic, level 2 is basic, level 3, and we compare that across the state. You can see that. But the scale scores is really showing the growth because you can grow in one of those levels. So like if you're a level 2, it might be 100 scale or 75 scale points, and you might grow 30, but you're still at a level 2. That makes sense? So we can't really just go off the level because it's not really an indicator of growth. It can be, but you can grow within each level. So if we look at scale score and look at the actual numbers of what their test score is onto a scale score, we can compare from year to year. But we got to do that. What we haven't got figured out is the exact change. And that changes a little bit every year. It's not very far off. This is a pretty good indicator, but it's not accurate. So we will get that. So with that, if you look at the actual leveling, and I won't go through all these, I just want to give you this example on this one. So the leveling from 7th grade to 8th grade, and this is overall average for those 4 years, we leveled 35% of our kids leveled up 1.1 levels. But 7.8% of our kids dropped 1 level, which ties into those scale scores. That makes sense? So we still have about 8% of our kids that dropped a full level, like from basic to below, or from proficient to, from advanced to proficient. You also have to keep in mind, as they go through the years, it's different subject matter. And sometimes it gets tougher. Could be different teachers, different curriculum, how it's all presented. There's lots of variables there that we don't see on these scores.
So do we have we're talking about eighth grade.
Yep.
So do we have seventh graders performance? Because this year they
Yes.
will be in eighth grade.
Yes.
And can we use that?
So yes, looking at the,
And for the future, I would love to have that. Help me, I don't- I've seen them doing it.
Braille, you like Braille? Yeah, I got you. So yeah, well, with this, we just produced these reports. We finally got to them today. So I can certainly give you copies, but I don't want all these out here because these are not exact. There's some, we got to fine tune this. Yep. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And it's a good point that we need to actually take in for each year. The growth is going to be different because they're
Yes.
different cohorts.
Right.
So the
Yes.
growth is going to be a different goal for this current eighth grade class than it was for last year's eighth grade class.
Yes, but if you look at trends in the average, that was one of the things we were discussing, I was discussing with Dwayne, is if we look at the trends and the overall average, we should be able to come up with a reasonable number. Although there's anomalies. For example, I'll just, for this one, when we were looking at it, on year 2017, 72% of the students increased their scale score by at least 1 point. And only 28% went down.
What grade are they going in now?
I don't know, 18, 19, they'd be juniors or seniors. Yeah. And then there was a year prior to that, that the scale score, only 45% of the students increased, but 50% decreased. So that when you look at the average overall, yes, it is in particular the class. But one of the problems whenever we start doing data like this, and you guys all are well aware of this, is you're not comparing apples to apples. There's so many variables when you have a different class. But that's the information we have. That's the information the state wants reported. So we have to figure out the best way to use that information. And if we're looking at scale scores and looking at an average over a 5-year, we can see the trends. We can easily see that there's a trend there. Yep, there's anomalies, but there's a trend that we are seeing about 60% of our kids are increasing between 7th grade and 8th grade in scale score. So
But that, we have to also remember that that's only one measure, and that
Yes.
that's why we went to the maps testing.
Yep.
So that we would have more accurate local data. This is
Yes.
just data to fill a spot in that hole, because
yes,
kids in and out, there's all kinds of things that mess with that data. But our maps testing that we have conversations around is certainly our kids, and we have way more control over that.
Right.
It's more accurate data.
and that's where I was headed to with this. With the board level, you guys need to look overall. And that's why I put this information out there so we can see, yeah, we want to get down in the weeds, but that really comes to the building with the maps testing and how they're changing all that. Of course, I mean, we all need to know that, but how they're doing that is not required on the state report.
I remember hearing Brian is doing the maps in Orofino. Are we doing maps in Timberline?
District-wide.
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 And do you have the data that you were just showing me? Is that from maps or is that?
So data here is ISAT data, because that's what Dr. Garrett was just talking about.
Okay.
But what Vicar said is very true. I don't have my teachers hang their hat on their ISAT data.
Right.
You know, we want the students to perform their best and do the best they can, but really data is only as good as the user's hands you put it in and how you conduct those data meetings. To me, I mean, if how we utilize the data with our teachers is the most important thing. If the state wants us to give them a number that we're gonna show growth on, we can give them a number that we're gonna show growth on. But that doesn't do us any good. The teachers in the classrooms are the ones who are accessing this data or conducting the data meetings. Then they're looking at the standards the students are low in or high in and having those conversations to improve their pedagogy. To me, I mean, to be quite frank, some of these goals are just what the state is asking us to do to jump through a hoop, when really
Yeah.
it's not talking about what kids actually need. What
Right.
kids need are good teachers who are willing to investigate what's going on with the student and push forward. So, so we just need to set a goal and move past it.
So my suggestion is, in hearing that, if that, does that ring true? I mean.
Yep.
that ring true? Then why don't we just look and take an average of what we have from the last year and fill the form in
And-
and then talk about the real stuff that we want. to talk about.
Right.
There you go.
And see, the thing is this, and this is why this was developed from the state. This comes from the State Board of Education, not the State Department of Education. So the state board wants to have their fingers in the progress of every school, but they're not aware of how they can actually affect that. What we know is in the classroom and then with our MAPS testing, we know it's much better than the ISAT testing. You know, we're comparing against the state average. We're comparing against everybody else that takes in the state. Is it good information? Yeah, we can use it. but does it talk about individual students? No, it doesn't give us the indication of what we need to do for that student to make them grow. So this is a general 30,000 foot level. We have to do it because it's a state requirement. And the introductory part of this to data, I mean, it's kind of grueling and painful, but it's a piece of it. As we go through, we'll get down in the weeds and more detail in it. But for today, we need to kind of keep this up here at this level. That's,
So can you do that and pull the numbers from the history?
I have them.
Right, and populate this.
Yep.
And then.
Yep.
Present that as do we all agree on this?
Absolutely. I mean, I have this right in front of me, so I could easily fill this out. It doesn't mean it's going to be true and accurate as far as, are we going to meet it? I don't know. But what we're really doing is looking at our maps data. So that comes back to whenever we're doing our 3 times a year assessments and making adjustments as we go. So.
Maps data gives you.
It
more
does.
of the
I think
improvement,
what,
is that right?
maybe another way to put it is that right now we have pieces of information, but we don't necessarily have the piece of information that we need to make the decision. So the piece of information we would need is, what did the 7th graders score on their ISATs last year? And so what can we make as a goal for them for this year for 8th grade? Does that make sense?
Our seventh graders, district-wide scored 36% proficient or advanced. State average was 43%. But again, the standards changed. So the state average for 8th graders was 38%. And those are different standards, so different math standards. And 8th grade proficiency statewide is lower than 7th grade proficiency. And so if they were 36% as 7th graders, that's not to say they're going to be, and that's when you talk about those deviations in growth.
Yep.
I think it's important to understand we're talking about changing in standards.
Mhm.
And you have to,
That's
and
been
that's
there
where the
too.
state average is important, if this is the data that we're looking at, because saying that they're going to grow by 10% each year, when historically there have been dips at the state level, you have to take that into consideration, because it might be something like statistics and probabilities that's new to them, or algebraic, any algebraic standards, and that causes dips in those until it doesn't. And
Or a massive hormone rush.
or a massive hormone rush.
Yeah.
That's right.
So what was it the state what did we do last year? IRI?
District-
I mean,
no,
ISAT,
ISAT,
yeah.
We did
8th
36% as a district
7th grade.
as 7th grade.
Okay.
Correct.
So if you're looking at the historic data, we're saying that about 35% of our students have increased a level every year. So we're seeing a 35, I mean, it goes right along with the data that we're supporting here. About 35% of the kids go from 7th grade to 8th grade, they increase a level,
Mhm.
which is similar to what we're talking about. And to be reasonable, I mean, kind of take those two pieces in consideration. That's probably a reasonable number. Obviously, we want to shoot higher than that. But I agree, looking at the data from last year and then implementing it this year, because it is class specific. But we want to get to the point where we can see that as a trend overall. If we're seeing it's just dumping from 7th grade to 8th grade, we got, what are we doing in 8th grade that's really screwing this up?
Right, but that's why let's use the data.
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
if you use the data for projection, and then
Right.
I don't know what the evaluation tool is on that performance, but that's when we have that kind of conversation. Like, whoa, there
Right.
is a, is there
Okay.
a problem?
Well, and that's where, this time next year, we look and say, this was our goal. Let's say it was 40%. We should have seen at least a 4% growth in that group of 7th graders into 8th grade, but instead they dropped to 25%.
Right.
What's going on at that 8th grade level that we can, add more resources, or do we need to be teaching something beyond what they're being
Right.
taught right now? Those kind of
Well, that's when
things.
we pull in the maps information, right, to say, okay, why didn't we, if it was that drastic? Is that the right way to use these tools?
Yeah, so this is the SIP plan is supposed to be a living document.
Right.
Really, what it ends up sometimes being is something that we do, and this is great, because a lot of times administrators just sit down and do it, and then it goes in a drawer somewhere, because they check it off the list of the state. If you want something that's a living document, like that we're actually going to review, then you're taking a look at those percentages year to year and doing what we're talking about,
Mhm.
and saying, okay, well, that wasn't realistic, or hey, we looked at levels of proficiency and advanced instead of looking at growth. That's why I
Right.
do like what you
Yep.
talked about, because if you're looking at growth for kids, that makes sense.
Yep.
But the maps does a better job of
Yep.
outlining growth. I'm not gonna spend the time on this.
Right.
Staff I'm gonna spend the time on something where they can have valid conversations
Right.
vertically and look at.
And this does become something that you just have to do, but we need to make it a little bit more than that. And that's why I'd like to incorporate some of this, because now we have the opportunity to do the growth metrics in there, which is important because I think the growth is really what we're looking at. We're not looking at, well, here's our top tier of our kids that are doing well. We want to look at all the kids, are they moving somewhere? That's my goal with it. So let's do this then. So like the percentage of students, last year we had our goal set at 48% but we need to be looking at realistically.
And so knowing the seventh graders that we're getting in,
Mhm.
that were a district average of, let's see, I think I clicked on the wrong number, 36.
36, what you said,
Yeah,
yeah.
36 was our district average. I think with the state average being 43, I think a 5% growth would be appropriate at 41%.
That sounds reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want
Yeah.
to overshoot. We want to be realistic, but, and then if it doesn't happen, we reevaluate to say, why didn't it happen?
Right.
That's right.
And historically, we'll tie this in. So historically, 35% of our kids have improved at least one level. So that tells you that they are moving up over time. Will we be at that point? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. So that helps support that trend. I
Sounds
think.
good.
Yeah.
Mm. So,
It's been an hour.
Yeah, but
It's
now we
okay.
have an agreed
That's right.
strategy.
We got two.
So with the growth piece of it, the adequate growth is a piece that we've talked about. So what is adequate growth? How do we want to measure that? And I like the scale score. I think it makes sense if we look at that scale score and get that in place, we can show what kind of percentage our kids are improving. So this is including, and the reason this was put in was to include kids that are not just proficient and advanced.
They report average scale score, and they report it for state
Mhm.
districts.
Yep.
So it'd be
Yep.
simple to set a growth goal on the average scale. score.
Right.
So for seventh graders last year, it was 25. Plus or minus 9. That's the average scale score. 2,500.
Scale score.
2,545. It's just interesting.
When mine goes into problem solving model skill scores, there are concepts I just said this.
So,
So this is the.
right, yeah. Okay, so my point is. So my point is, come to us with the logic. Fill it in. Come to the logic with us of the why and the how. And if there are questions, we can ask the questions.
Scale score. So you're finding that deviation, it's really about 25% bottom end, 25% top end, and then 50%. So it's really almost broken up 25 to 30% all the way through. For below basic. And see, the scale scores change as you go. There's a lot of data.
He's been just waiting to do this.
Well, okay. Yes. I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at doing a trend. So we see what's going on. I'm not looking at the individual year. If we see a trend and it's outside of that norm,
You don't want to
I
nail
feel
this
pretty good
down.
about
You're-
that. It's
you're-
like, okay, wait a second. Here's our norm. Why are we way
Yeah.
down here? It'll tell us the same thing. It's just a different way of looking at it.
Right.
I don't disagree with you. I gotta have something to do. You know, I don't have anything else. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, these basic.
right.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. So let's move on to our trends on our eighth grade. So if we're looking at our adequate growth. So what was it you said, Jason? Bring up those numbers. 25. So what it's asking is percentage of students who score or who make adequate growth on the eighth grade math ISAT. So we got to have a percentage of students. Yeah. It's not your link. Oh, let me change.
You get this.
You must
from
have the
your-
old one.
Okay.
Let me change it. Sorry.
Now we're in the-
My bad. Yeah. Yeah.
We have the 2019-20 combined plan methods and demographics.
Well, I gotta get my other screen back there so I can do something.
That's, yeah. Thanks.
Right.
Oh, sorry. We're
Let's
leaving for
see,
good.
2021, let's go to the. Where's that? Okay. Well, I've lost everything.
You know, I'm fine moving forward, if we just look at the resources that you guys have for the data, and then, you know, let's pick a number that makes sense based on the data that we have, and moving on. Reasonable growth. Yeah, based on the data that we have, you know, I mean, we're only as good as we are, right? And we are our. And so using how we performed in the past. Using what we did in the, you know, projecting last year for the future as a way to measure that.
Well, and you better have a crystal ball this year because so many kids. weren't
Should be
in
able to go
school,
back
were
and
in school,
click on
in
that. It should
school,
change
out
your
of
link
school. So many,
back on the
so many
agenda.
deviations. from
Should
the
get you the new
norm
one.
that it's-
Sorry about that. I had the old one pulled up. You're right.
Yeah, so this is.
Did I get it for you? Okay, cool. Yep.
Things we talked about and all that, so there's, to me, there's a reason to not be super high. If you want to get in super high, across the board, but then there's.
Yeah.
So the growth isn't a new component.
It is. Yep.
So, um,
Why is my
so
screen
you
not
showed
working?
some targets already.
No, those are from last year's.
Oh, those are-
So 41% are proficient, so we want 60% in improvement. Some of those
Come
are
on,
not gonna
computer.
make it, so we gotta knock it down to maybe
You got this.
50%,
It's 20% improvement.
40%
There we go.
You're talking about the growth goal,
improvement, yeah.
Yeah, so,
Growth.
depending on how you define it.
so if we look at.
You
how-
got
if we look at
The green
data
piece over there I
so
stuck in there. That's what I
for
did.
eighth grade,
The green
so
box
seventh grade,
is the actuals.
the percentage of
Over to the
them
right.
improved, but a percentage of them
Is
declined.
it showing up in your
So
spreadsheet?
it's the same
Oh,
thing
yeah, it's on the
as
metric.
graphs.
Yeah, it's on the metrics. Yep. Yep.
The problem with that is you might decline a level, but it's.
So let's move on here a little bit so we can. So do you guys think that if we're looking at adequate growth, it's not looking at a change in a level, right? It's a change in your scale score. So are you looking at a percentage change or are you looking at a numerical change? Because basically, if you look at the scale scores, they're all really 1 point per percentage. There's 100 in each one of them. There's a 100-point range. So those scale scores, as you look at them, as you move up 1% or 1 point, you move up 1%. Does that make sense? So if you increase 60%, you're in the 60 percentile of that scale score, which is really like a proficient area because usually the breaking points is somewhere around 30% and 60%, which below 30% is below basic, 30 to 60 or 30 to 50, sorry, and then 50 to 80. So basic, below basic, proficient, advanced. And they're a little bit different. I don't know what's going on with all of this, but my computer is, I apologize. So we just need to look at that increase. And when we look at historically, that's what I was looking at. Why is my computer?
You shared with us a decrease, but then you also shared that some.
Yeah.
are decreased.
Yes,
So there was a percentage of the population. that
Yes.
decreased,
on average,
right?
yes.
So then, if they think we should pick a number in between those two. Because overall, we're going to have some increase, but yet we know we're gonna have some decrease.
Although I
Right.
would suggest our goal would be not to have any decrease.
Right. Just like yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the,
And
It's
are we talking ISAT scores again? Or are we
Yes.
talking growth within our
I-
district?
ISAT score.
It's all
all
ISAT.
ISAT, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, it does say on the math ISAT. Okay.
Decreased percentage actually isn't. I mean, it sounds
Yeah.
bad, but.
No, it's,
what you get with kids that come
Yep.
in might not.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you. So I think on our own MAPS testing, our goal should everybody have growth, but
Mhm.
on the ISAT once a year test, we may get new students to the area, blah, blah, blah. No, that needs to be a realistic expectation.
we show adequate progress.
Yep. So adequate progress would be what percentage?
What percentage of students?
Sorry, the other factor there that Jason and I were just talking about is that you also get high kids. So if a kid comes in and they're advanced, let's say in 7th grade, some kids tend to plateau a little bit, especially when standards shift. And so those high kids can go down a little bit sometimes. And it's not that they stop growing, it's that they'll grow again. But if you have a kid that's very high and advanced, we'll see a kid go from let's say a 243 to a 240 sometimes. And it's not that they weren't growing, but at that moment in time, sometimes they have a little bit of a dip there. And so we've seen that where kids grow, but they go down by a few points because there's a standard deviation on these. So if they're already maxed out, that standard deviation, that's in the scale score number that Dr. Garrett was talking about.
Yep.
It says plus or minus 9
Right.
as the standard deviation on that scale score.
Yep.
And so sometimes there's a little bit of
Yep.
a little bit there. So you get a little bit of that too. We see sometimes it's not that the kid's not learning, not that they're not working hard. We just see a little bit of a. Would that be?
Yeah, and we're also, sometimes they're learning way beyond that, especially in
Mhm.
math. They might be taking algebra 2, and the test is on grade level standards for, 9th grade. So sometimes you have some things like that.
So what's reasonable for kids number of students to show growth? To gain somehow in
I would
8th
go
grade?
with what's reported as easy, because this is just, for the state compliance, I would
Yep.
go with moving your average scale score. If they reported the median, I always like using the median score for growth, because if you move the median, that doesn't allow a high student to move, to support the whole group, or a low student to pull the whole group down.
So
So out of last year's 8th grade class, what was the percentage that had growth?
we don't have 21 data in here because we had a gap on 20.
Right.
So I don't have the 21 data, but we're showing, we average 58.2% over the trend over time. It's ranged anywhere from 72 to 45.
So
Increase.
58 was the average.
Average over 4 years. And I think 60 to 65% growth is probably 2/3 of your kids making a gain, probably reasonable. I mean,
Okay.
when you really think about it. We hope more, but we have a lot of factors that we can't control, but I mean, we got to start somewhere, and this has never been done, so we don't have any trends, or we don't know. So we're looking at that as to what we're starting. Disagreements, agreements, 60, 65% of the kids, what do you think?
I'm thinking probably lower, like 60, probably not 65, just knowing those variables that they can't control.
So just-
60% good?
That's good, yeah.
Moving on.
Gotta start somewhere.
Yep.
Yep.
Start there and adjust.
So
When you say growth,
that's just an increase on their scale score. Moving up a point.
yep, 60%.
Yeah,
And
we
then it
didn't
counts for the
define
ones that
adequate,
don't.
so it's just growth.
So 40% of the kids either stay the same or drop,
Or stay the same.
or stay the same. Yeah. My computer is. Hey, Russell, you happen to have another power cord? Work for this one? No?
It's-
No, it's not.
Chromebook.
No, it's not.
Well, while you're doing that, I just want to highlight some positive things to.
Can bring my, I don't think so. Go ahead.
So when we talk about these goals, I want to highlight some positive things. I know math has been a focus for us, but I want to highlight that our
Mine's gonna die.
7th grade ELA for our district was 71%, and the state average was 62. And English language arts. So our literacy efforts are going very well. And then our 8th grade ELA And I put this on the last board
What
report, I think.
was seventh grade again?
Um,
73?
So seventh grade for the district was 71%. And the state average is 62.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
we're exceeding state average with ELA in seventh grade as well as eighth grade, which we are at. Let's see here.
You guys have all that information in the facts I gave you, remember
Yep.
this summer?
And I put it on my
gave you
board
facts with
report
all of
too.
this. I've had hard copies of the board
okay.
meeting this summer.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys this, as the
Thank you
board
for
and
reminding us.
leadership, do we need to go through each one of these, or do you guys want us to establish those and bring those to you?
I
As a
want
board?
you to use the data and establish.
Everybody agree to that? That'll sure save us a lot of time sitting here going
I
through each
think that
one.
makes a ton of sense to come in and add it, because the way we had meetings set up a couple of years ago, where we had specific things that we talked about throughout different board meetings, I think that makes it so that we address this document over time. We have to get something to the state initially, we get it set up, get it approved, send it, and then we amend it as we get more data. That's
right.
It should be a working document. It can't be if it's just a check box, check the box and move on, but I don't think that makes you better.
Right. You guys good with that? So we'll work on that. We'll get that done before the next board meeting. We'll bring that to you and we'll have that discussion so we can go through those. And if there's anything, I'll get it to you guys as soon as I get it done so you can look it over. If you have questions or whatever, email those to me so we can address those at the board meeting.
Just as like a fair goal in mind, like just a reasonable growth and, so looking at
Right.
the performance of the last year's seventh
Yep.
grade class or fifth grade class, whatever it is. And then
expectation.
the reasonable expectation that they
Yep.
grow at least a certain percentage,
Right.
5%, whatever.
So there's a couple more pieces to this before we move on. And one is the metrics that we get to set our own, basically. Oh, my computer. I guess it's dying slowly. So last year we had on here K3 IRI spring average scores versus our fall average scores. So as we went through that process, we said 80%. We could track that as well. I think that's a reasonable goal to continue on there. Another one we talked about, and we just brought this up not too long ago, is our map testing scores and what kind of goals we want to look at with the map testing. So that's probably something we need to do as a group as well. And then the other one was, we talked about, we wanted to put on here a metric to hold ourselves accountable for your evaluations and Danielson, all that's just tying together with our goals that we were doing district wide. So we'll put that on there as well. But is there anything else that comes to mind that you guys as a collective group right now are thinking of as far as what kind of goals we need to be setting? Are we missing something? So the overarching piece of this is, we're trying to tie this ISAT data back into something that's useful and that we can use, and our map testing to show that that's useful, and then setting goals for ourselves to make sure we're held accountable to be presenting this and reviewing it. So that does tie back into the calendar piece, which we're going to hit here really quickly. As soon as my computer gets enough juice to literally ran it, didn't it?
Keeping the IRI targets at 80%.
On the IRI, you need to let us know that. If that was me.
Might be overshooting this a little bit there, just because the state changed the test on this about 2 years ago. And we saw pretty significant decrease in performance based on implementation of that new system. State average last year was 65%.
Is that in the kindergarten level?
K3.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Fill up my tank while you're at it?
Mike, did you hear that?
Yes, I did. So you'd like to change it to 65,
Well, state
60?
average last year was 65. Our district average was 67.
So sticking around that 65 to 70% is
I think
reasonable.
70% sounds reasonable to me. I think 67 was a great consideration.
Yeah. Okay.
They actually showed more growth in our school last year than they have over the last 4 years.
Right.
Implementation of that to assessment, so.
Okay. So we will get that completed. We'll get that document to you guys as board members as soon as we get it done. And if you see something that's there, that's standing out, by all means, like I said, email me. And we'll have that discussion at our September 20th board meeting. The other piece of this was the calendar. This is a piece that I think it was, I loved it because when I build the agenda, I could throw them right in. It's an easy piece to do that with, once you have that document. This is the one from 2019. So we can go through this real quick and hit some of the major dates. I know you have some of that.
I have the dates all on the set.
Yep, on the test calendar. Yep. And I can throw those in. So I guess things in particular that we want to see. So if there's things that you want to see on this per month, and this was set up July through our fiscal year, July through June. There's certain things that we can put on here. But if we're going to look at the testing, I want to go through that first to make sure we get that piece on here to review the data. Is probably is more important than anything at this point. So. Comments, questions? Do you have this one? Did I link that to you? You have it? Making sure. Yeah. Well, you can always go to the link. Whatever I change, you'll be able to see it again because it stays live the whole time. So. So our first, if we want to talk about data, what's the first time during the year from July, August? What's the first time we really start talking about data? You do some preliminary testing in September, right? Is when you start. Okay.
And by the time we get the results of the map for the IRI.
Okay. So are you talking maps or IRI? IRI. Okay.
Do the same thing in December, correct? So
Oops. Works well. We had it in February before.
yes, that's true.
Oh.
And then because again in April and May. So I think we had all these results due by the June board. Well, I still had it, it was slow, but I still had it in.
So you said June.
Yeah.
And I'll clean this up when we get it here.
And June would be, the maps, the IRI, and the.
Right.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So we had the SAT data as well. Is that something we can still report in June? We still do that? Would that be feasible? Do we have any of that data? SAT. I don't think you guys have that. Do you have it back by then?
It's sketchy when it comes back.
Yeah. Well, we'll shoot for that. Summer programs. Okay. So everybody good with the data on that? So we're doing the 3. And I'll throw other things in here as well. We have some things from from 2 years ago. So what else do you guys want to see, I guess, as board members looking at data? If we're looking at, whenever we're talking about the ISAT and the maps and the IRI, I mean, we can pull up the SIP plan as well and make adjustments to it as we go. So that just becomes part of that, if that's reasonable.
The first one would be in February, because that will give us a good data to compare.
So yes. Yes. Yep. So yeah, you'd have two rounds of the maps and you'd have the IRI as well. February. Right. Okay. Wow, everybody got quiet. Must be ready to be done. So let's just kind of go through it. And we've already done the data piece of that. There's a lot of other things that happen on this. And what I'll do is I'll go back and pull some of those things that we have to do regularly and put them on here. Because there are some things, like one thing that I saw coming up here in September, and I know we need to do this as a leadership team as well, is our leadership stipends. We need to go through that. So you guys be thinking about that so we can have that to present. And I know our meeting is after. That's one of the problems with having our meeting after. Some of these things need to take place. So it's kind of hard to do that a month ahead on some of those. So however you guys want to do that. But that needs to be done by October. We can do
just
it in
need to know
September.
how many and how much. So
Will
we can
do.
Start forming those lists.
Yes. 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 It's on there. Yep. Yeah, it's something we have to do. So we'll talk about that at our September meeting. I'll have all that for you after. Yeah, we have a total dollar, but we're breaking that up differently this year because part of what we're doing, just so you guys are aware, is we're actually implementing more of a mentoring program than we ever had before. Mr. Therian's heading that up. And so that stipend, we actually have dedicated a certain amount of money towards those teachers who are the mentor teachers. So that will be part of their leadership stipend. So we're going to take that off the top. And every year that will vary depending on the number of new teachers. And then we'll divide the rest up from there. So. Makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So the leadership stipends, is that what you're asking? So yeah, so basically leadership stipends are anything that's above and beyond the regular contracted duties that have to do with certain areas. There's like A through G, which is anything from tutoring to what else is on there? Well, like doing a mentoring program, things that are above and beyond their regular contract, and they have to be done outside of contract hours. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So we have another, and we have another pot of money that is professional development oriented. So if they're doing something else, but that doesn't pay them for that. That pays for the participation or entry or whatever, those type of fees, travel.
The one other thing to add to the calendar would be like budget stuff and when that's
Mhm.
due in the spring and summer. And I know
As
that,
soon as negotiations are done.
I know, but it's good to have it on the calendar to know there's usually state
Yeah.
requirements.
Yep. I'll put those on. So June, let's see, we have to have the stuff to the,
We did, because we didn't have negotiations done.
We actually did not miss our deadline to approve it.
to approve it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
We have to submit it earlier than that, and then we have to approve it. And there's a window to approve it in there once it's submitted and for them to review. And then we met that window this year. We had to crunch and have a special meeting, but we did. Yeah, it was tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so negotiations, depending on if they go long or not, that's what, and really negotiations, we can blame somewhat on that, but a lot of it was the state didn't decide for a long time. Our legislators didn't approve our budget.
That's true.
So that was the number one issue. We're all going in circles till we found out what we had.
While you're on that topic, I need a board member or two to sit on that evaluation.
We'll do that.
So, and then Christine Herbst had volunteered as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we're involved with that negotiation.
We have some deadlines, one of them being the end of October, we have to have a
Like that?
task completed, so we'll need to get our heads together.
Yeah, good.
You and I can meet over coffee and plan our strategy.
That sounds good.
All right,
All right.
you live real close to the
Yeah.
coffee shop.
That I do.
LFPA, I take it.
yeah. So
Yep.
that's just kind of
Yeah,
gives
I
that
can stick
timeline.
those on there as well.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, some of the bigger items, and we had some things on there. I took some off that are not as pertinent. Some things have changed, but those are the type of things we need. So it's kind of pre-built.
Mhm.
Because every month it's like, oh man, we got to get, and I just use reference the years prior.
Mhm.
So you can see that most of the time it's pretty consistent.
Mhm.
That's why sometimes the date is wrong. I miss on the
Mhm.
agenda because a lot of times I'll pull it over.
From a different.
So,
date.
yeah.
Mhm.
So another thing we had on here on our timing, and I wanted to bring this up to the board members is the time set for our board questions on our agenda. We see this a lot and we go back and forth, and we've asked for years for this to happen. If you guys can get your questions to us like by Friday, so we have a chance to prepare if there's some of those deep questions, because when we have a lot of those questions in the board meeting, we've all had a pretty big day. And I don't want to make excuses or reasons for anything, but it's pretty hard to sometimes come up with some of those answers if we're not prepared for it, some of those questions. So we really appreciate that if you can get those. And you can put those right to me. I can disseminate it to whoever it is, and then we can be prepared. And obviously, there's always going to be questions in board meetings. I'm not saying don't ask questions. I'm just saying some of these we would like to be prepared for so we can.
Heavier question.
Some of the heavier questions would be nice, but well, and we also, as a team, I mean, that's just a little bit of mutual professional respect there to be prepared so we can do that in public. It is a public meeting and we'd like to be prepared for it. So
Especially if it requires some data.
absolutely. Sometimes it's hard to come up with that off your top of your head. And so we've always had that, try to get the packet out. So what I've been doing is I post the agenda by Tuesday. It has to go out by 4 o'clock so it can make the paper. And I usually send that to you guys at the same time. And then that's been my norm. We don't always have all the attachments to it because we get reports and all those type of things that come in by Thursday is what I try to do. We're working on our AP, trying to get it done a little bit quicker so we can get those to you a little more quickly. But yeah, if we can get everything kind of ready to go by Friday, and then on Monday we can fine tune that if we need to. And, last year was not a good example for people coming in new. That was not how we normally operate. We were just, hopefully we don't have 27 board meetings or whatever we had last year, 32 or whatever it was.
So for this September meeting,
Mhm.
it's plan for those literacy, sit, and strategic. I totally get the sit now.
Yep.
But what are the other two?
So what was the other two you said?
Literacy and strategic.
Yeah, so our literacy plan, I need to take that off there because they've combined the plan. There used to be a literacy plan and then the SIP plan, and they've combined them into one. So I need to take that off there. That's a good catch. And what was the other one?
Strategic.
Yeah, our strategic plan, again, is combined with the SIP plan. So the SIP plan, they've combined everything together. It used to be these different documents that you had lots and you repeated a lot of the data. They finally got together and said, let's just make one, but then they made one long one instead of, but it's still just one document. So I need to take those off
There
there.
were a couple issues that have been brought up around safety.
Mhm.
Are we going to discuss those in the safety meeting or?
We have to approve a safety plan as well. And so that I just put that on there as well. So it should be there.
That
Yep.
has to be an executive session.
It does. Yep.
And then, so, the bus stuff, is that in the safety plan?
The bus stuff as in,
The bollards, the safe zone
oh,
that we've been talking about?
so we don't have it in there, but we certainly can. So whenever we have a safety inspection, there's different routes that we have. In fact, we just have our building safety inspections coming up. They just scheduled for the end of September. The transportation does its separate inspection. So that, just like food service, they have their separate inspection. So all of those are separate, then we pull them all together. So as far as safety, that's really not what's been done in the past, but we can certainly roll them in there.
So when do they fit on the list?
Yeah, so I don't know. That's a good question. I know we do our bus inspection, we usually do in the fall. I'm not sure how they schedule that, to be very honest with you. I see the results when it's done, but it's not something that needs to be board approved, but it's something we can certainly share. Yeah, and it just all needs to be put together. It's a good point. Yep. So we're just required to approve a SIP plan as a board and the safety plan. So. Did I just see you yawn? Did you just yawn? Tuesdays are the worst. The longest. Charity, if you're scrolling through there, you probably have rights to type on that as well if you'd like to change.
It wouldn't
add.
let me do anything,
Oh.
but that's okay.
Here, I will give that to you.
I was gonna start cutting and pasting and just add
Yeah.
into this thing. But I will, oh, I should request edit access, right on.
You should know.
So the other question I have is, it seems like we always have some sort of building report and our program report. Is that every month?
Yeah.
Okay, so that
Yeah,
doesn't
so
need to
those
be
are
all that one
routine,
day.
yeah. So our standing reports will just be that, standing reports. Yep. Yeah, if there's anything additional, I'll put it under discussion. So the discussion items, we kind of got on a run there the year before last, or before we had the COVID thing, where we had a lot of our discussion items the month before, we had action on them. So we had time to discuss them, get prepared for it, and then we had action on. So we didn't spend a huge amount of time on discussion during that meeting on that. So we were a little more prepared. We, like I said, you stepped into a whole different world. And I apologize for that. But yeah, we'll try to get back to that where we can, so like the leadership stipends, it's something if we can prepare in September, that'd be great. Right now, we have not prepared for that, but if we can get it prepared and then we can, kind of hash that out and fine tune it for the next time. Probably a bad example, but something like that. So we can talk about the plans, then approve them the next month. So.
So, in thinking about preparation, as you prepare the set for the data that, as we discussed, it would be nice if it's possible for us to see that scale of
Yep.
trend that you use. And
Yep.
so that we can see that logic.
Yep. And so one of the things, like I said, Dwayne and I, and Charity says I'm getting in the weeds here a little bit, but I'm gonna get a little bit more simple format on how to disseminate the scale scores or whatever, so we can figure out exactly what that looks like from grade to grade. Because I think if we look at those trends, it's important. We don't make all of our decisions on it, but it's a piece of data to say, traditionally, we've seen growth from 7th to 8th grade. Why is that? Or we've seen a decline, or whatever grades those are. And then we can look into why is that? Yep, their classes are different, but there's also a lot of other variables. Is there something we're missing? Just another piece of data. It doesn't have to be the whole, but just another piece of it. So Dwayne loves data. Give him a spreadsheet task and he's on it. And I'm like, what did you just do?
Well, the state would be in a lot better place if every
They have
district
Dwayne.
had a Dwayne. Because he crosses his T's and dots his I's and makes sure that we all do too.
Very valuable.
Dwayne tried to our dad and I. He doesn't let anything get by him.
Mm-mm.
He's outstanding.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well trained. Right, Russell? Yeah, we do too. Now that we're in the same office, a little food offering is pretty good this time.
He does like snacks.
Healthy snacks. He likes healthy snacks. I like going.
Oh, my God.
So what is the January reorganization?
That's what I was trying to
Yeah.
clarify, but I still can't access.
No, that's fine. Go ahead if you want.
So that's the whole board reorganization of the trustees. So that would be signing in. And there's actually on the January meeting, there's a whole list of like 9 things that have to happen underneath that. So that's more kind of like a reminder, but I was going to add to it so that we could understand what that is.
Yeah.
But it's the swearing in, it's
Right.
the assignment of chair, vice chair, secretary, and then also like board calendar. If we want to change meetings or meeting times, that's when you do it. You can't do it in between. You do it in January. So, because I know you had asked
Yeah.
that question about the timing of our
Yeah.
meetings, and that's when we discuss it and
Yeah.
decide if something needs to change.
Who can sign checks, those type of things. Who's our signer as a board member? Just, that's the time to take care of all that business so we can operate throughout the year. Yep. So it used to be, and that's not to confuse things, but we used to, when then the board take over July 1 is whenever your board membership, and they changed it to calendar year a few years ago. So now it is January 1 to December 31st, a 4-year term, which puts us right in the middle of the year. So that's something that we can discuss as a board. But one thing you have to remember is if you have board turnover and then you start doing evaluations of administrators, myself and principals, that happens in January and February with new members. So, or we can do it in December.
And that's
That's what I
based on-
vote for.
that's Based on the election calendar, not
Yes.
fiscal year.
Yes.
Exactly, because it used to be from July to July,
Right.
and now it's January to January instead. So
Yeah. So when they changed it, the people that were supposed to be up in July were actually, they extended to December. So they had like a 4.5-year term and then they started from there. Just that 1 year. Yep. Good stuff.
That July meeting that the principals typically didn't go to when that reorg happened was so much better.
Yeah,
With all that stuff going on, there's not much for us to do but twiddle our
Right.
thumbs.
right.
yeah, and not that we can change it, but I did
Yeah.
like it better
Yeah.
that way because the new board members had all summer to try and figure out
Mhm.
like what they were doing. They
Right.
had meetings they could go to for
Right.
orientation, education, and now it happens right in the middle of the school year and they have to hit the ground running.
It
So,
can be pretty disruptive as well. For not,
One of those political decisions that didn't help education.
yeah,
correct.
So we'll be going out for the levy. The election will be in May,
in March,
the election's in March.
Correct.
Yes,
So then we want to probably have levy discussions much
Yes.
earlier than this March.
It's in December.
Yep.
It's listed under the December meeting. Mhm.
levy ballot wording, we have to have that approved, I believe, by the December 31st, I believe it is. There's a date in there, and I'm not sure what it is, but that's why we do it in December.
So, and we might want to add that under November discussion.
Okay,
Okay.
We don't have anything listed in here regarding the schedule for the evaluations of the teachers, you know what I mean? We kind of have a plan, didn't we?
yeah, so the calendar that we had with as we met with the negotiations, yes, we need to put those in here.
Okay,
Yep, we have those dates.
okay.
Yep, those are good ones to put in as well.
Day on the Hill.
That's
Legislative day in Boise, or-
it is, yes, legislative day. And then there's also a really good law conference in April as well.
There's what?
A good law conference in April. That's also
Oh.
in Boise. It's excellent.
Is that what was on the email there talking about that? No, there's some kind of conference coming up.
Yeah, there's a conference coming up. Is it I think it's the ISB, the fall conference is it in Boise?
That's,
I'm not
Or is
sure.
it the-
I didn't
that's
look
probably
at
what
that.
you're talking about.
Yeah.
Though. That's the November
That's
Yeah.
different than what
general,
you're talking.
general ISBA conference.
Yeah,
And that's every November.
Okay,
yeah, and then the law conference is in the spring. So there's really 2 good opportunities for board members to go get some training. And a lot of them are online these after last year. So I think there'll still be the same type of opportunities this year. Not sure.
I
We'll
have
see.
not seen that yet.
Last I heard, they were going to shift to that because of what's going on in Boise and everywhere else. So, but I haven't seen it either.
All right. Anything else to discuss or address? Everybody's had a long day.
No, thanks everybody for doing. I know we have a lot of data. We still have some work to do, but I appreciate getting everybody on the same page is what's important.
Board members, I sent you that Danielson document. It was saved as a Google Doc, so it lost some of its formatting, but the the bulk of the information is there. When I get home on my own computer, I'll send you the PDF. It's prettier.
That's the main thing.
Yeah,
As long as it's
the
pretty.
same stuff.
So another thing we'll want to put on here is work sessions too. So we need to be thinking about how often we want to have work sessions, or is that the work session, the times we review the data and correlate with those? Is that what we want to try to do? And we can do it during, we don't have to have work sessions. If we're managing our time in our board meetings, I have no problem with that. We just want to make sure we're not going 4 hours in a board meeting, because those are, well, they're useless after 2. It's hard.
Definitely.
I do too.
It is.
Yep.
And we haven't done that in quite a while, and it would be kind of nice
Yeah.
to see what needs
Agreed.
to be done, especially maybe this fall before we're talking about budget and all those kind of things.
Yep.
Then we can sit down after and just talk about why we do certain things.
Yep.
Got questions, I think it's good to have that. Perspective on what's going on.
Mhm.
Yep.
I'd love to have.
And I think more of a presence. I think whenever board members show up, just like when I show up, the less time we show up, the more when we do, people are like, what? But if you're there quite often for no particular reason, that becomes a whole different story. And it's not like we want you roaming our halls all the time looking for things to talk about, but you're welcome to come in anytime and look and participate. Yeah. 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 And I think we have some in our buildings quite often. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. See ya. I'm good. Thank you all. Okay. Time is it? 5:48.
Meeting adjourned. Make it official.
5:48. Thank you, guys.
Long enough.